You know what's fascinating about this TikTok ban? It's not about national security. It's about good old-fashioned American greed. Let's cut through the noise here. They're telling us this TikTok ban is about national security and data privacy. Really? Welcome to the Rachel Stein Show. Tonight we're ripping off the Band-Aid and exposing what's really behind this TikTok circus. You're not going to hear this on mainstream media because, well, they're part of the story. Let me tell you something my grandfather taught me. When governments start waving the national security flag, look for the profit margins hiding behind it. We're going to break down exactly who stands to make billions if TikTok becomes an American company. We're talking stock options, IPO windfalls, and market manipulation that would make Gordon Gekko blush. And here's the kicker. Those same politicians crying about data security? Wait until you see their investment portfolios. This isn't about protecting American kids, it's about protecting American billionaires. And by the end of tonight's show, you'll understand exactly why. So, on the 18th of January, 170 million Americans had their favorite app go dark. TikTok, in compliance with the Biden administration's new law, flipped the switch. Millions of screens went blank, creators lost their livelihoods, and the mainstream media started their victory lap about protecting American interests. But this isn't about national security, the interest of Americans, or protecting our kids. This is about something much larger and sinister that has ruled this country since the start. Good old-fashioned American greed and power. And let's not forget about the potential windfall if TikTok is forced to sell. We're talking about a company valued at $50 to $60 billion. You've seen the feeding frenzy among U.S. tech giants. It was like watching sharks circle a wounded seal, except the seal is worth billions and the sharks wear suits. So next time you hear a politician ranting about TikTok and national security, just remember, follow the money. Because in this town, it's always about the Benjamins, baby. So with so many offers that were on the table, why didn't TikTok take any of them? Oh yeah, the algorithm. Now, you see that piece of code is probably worth more than all the gold in Fort Knox. It's the only one in existence. But ByteDance is not willing to part with it. China's got a tight grip on that precious algorithm. They've slapped export controls on it faster than you can say national security. It's like trying to buy a car without the engine. Sure, you've got the shiny exterior, but good luck making it go anywhere. Now, you've got these heavy hitters throwing money around like it's Monopoly cash. Frank McCourt's team showing up with Mr. Wonderful Kevin O'Leary in tow, Bobby Kotick fresh off his Microsoft deal looking to make waves, and even Steve Mnuchin trying to get a piece of the action. But here's the real tea. They're all dancing around the elephant in the room, that precious algorithm. You know, the one thing that makes TikTok, well, TikTok. McCord's group is over here like, oh, we'll just rebuild it with American tech. And Mnuchin, thinking he could buy TikTok without its secret sauce. Even Elon Musk was getting pushed to swoop in and save the day. The bottom line is all these bigwigs can throw their billions around. But without that algorithm, they're essentially trying to buy Instagram's cooler cousin and turn it into Vine's awkward stepchild. And let's be real, nobody wants another Vine situation on their hands. But we're also looking at a price tag somewhere between 50 and 100 billion. Now, that's not chump change, even for these big players. It's enough to make even the big tech giants think twice. And speaking of big tech, don't hold your breath for Meta or Google to swoop in. The antitrust hawks would be all over that faster than you can say monopoly. And yet again, China has made it crystal clear. They're not fans of this forced sale idea. In fact, they might prefer TikTok to get the boot from the US entirely rather than hand over that algorithm. So, we've got a high-stakes game of chicken going on. The US government's waving the ban hammer. Potential buyers are circling like sharks, and China's standing firm on its tech. What do you think, with the new extension on the horizon, TikTok will possibly have an extra 90 days to come up with something? Can Trump do it? Will TikTok become a US company? Well, if it does, here is what possibly might be in the twinkling eyes of some of our biggest investors. Remember at the beginning of this broadcast, when I said it's not about national security, but about something much older and bigger? Greed. Let me explain what I mean. TikTok isn't just some app where kids dance and lip sync. We're talking about a platform with over 170 million monthly active users in the US alone. That's a whole lot of eyeballs, and where there are eyeballs, there's money. In 2023, TikTok generated a whopping $16 billion in US revenue. That's billion with a B, people. And you better believe that's got the old guard of Silicon Valley shaking in their overpriced sneakers. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, They're all watching their market share get eaten up by this Chinese upstart. But here's where it gets really interesting. While Congress is busy trying to ban TikTok, guess who's been quietly buying up stock in its competitors? That's right, our dear lawmakers. It's amazing how patriotic they get when their portfolios are on the line. Now, let's follow the money and see just how deep this rabbit hole goes. Hold on to your seat, because what I'm about to tell you might make your blood boil. My grandfather always said, Rachel, if you want to know what's really going on, look at where people put their money, not where they point their fingers. And boy, was he right. Let's start with the numbers, shall we? According to a report by Unusual Whales, a financial startup that tracks these things, our esteemed members of Congress saw their investment portfolios outperform the S&P 500 in 2024. Now, isn't that just a happy little coincidence? On average, Democratic lawmakers' portfolios increased by a whopping 31%, while their Republican counterparts weren't far behind at 26.1%. Meanwhile, the S&P 500 only managed a 24.9% gain. It's almost like they had some kind of inside information. But that couldn't be, right? Now, let's zoom in on some of the big winners. Congressman David Reuser, a Republican from North Carolina, saw his portfolio skyrocket by 149%. Most of that gain came from stocks he bought years ago in companies like Nvidia, MasterCard, and Visa. But here's where it gets interesting. Some of the other top performers, including Senator Ron Wyden, Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, and Congressman Dan Crenshaw, are known for trading frequently. Now, let's connect some dots. Throughout 2024, Congress approved several bills that just happened to enhance the value of major tech stocks. What a coincidence, right? One of these bills was our friend, the TikTok ban. Here's where it gets juicy. Congressman Michael McCaul, the author of the bill to ban TikTok, owns hundreds of thousands of dollars of stock in Meta, one of TikTok's chief rivals. I'm sure that had absolutely nothing to do with his decision to write the bill, right? But wait, there's more. Senator Markwayne Mullin bought up to $50,000 worth of Meta stock last January before voting to ban TikTok in April. Talk about impeccable timing. Now, let's talk about the other side of this coin, the lobbying efforts. ByteDance, TikTok's parent company, didn't just sit back and watch this unfold. Oh no, they opened up their wallets and went on a lobbying spree that would make a Vegas high roller blush. In the first quarter of 2024 alone, ByteDance spent a record-breaking $2.68 million on lobbying. That's more than they've ever spent in a single quarter since they started their influence operations in 2019. And get this, since 2019, they've poured more than $23.9 million into federal lobbying. That's a lot of whining and dining, folks. But all that money couldn't save them. Despite their best efforts, Congress still passed the bill, and President Biden signed it into law. It's almost like the fix was in from the start. Before we move on, let's talk about what lobbyists really do. These are the smooth talkers, the deal makers, the folks who grease the wheels of Washington. In simple terms, a lobbyist is like a professional schmoozer for hire. They're paid to bend the ears of politicians and try to sway their decisions. Here's how it typically goes down. A big company or interest group hires a lobbyist to push their agenda in Washington. The lobbyist then goes to work, setting up meetings with lawmakers, buying fancy dinners, and basically doing whatever it takes to get face time with the people in power. Once they've got that face time, they start pushing their clients' interests. Maybe it's trying to kill a bill that would hurt their profits, or pushing for a tax break that would fatten their wallets. For example, let's say big oil wants to drill in a protected area. They'll send their lobbyists to wine and dine senators, explaining how many jobs it'll create, conveniently leaving out the environmental impact, of course. Or take the tech giants. When Congress started making noise about breaking them up, you better believe their lobbyists were working overtime, schmoozing with lawmakers and trying to convince them that monopolies are actually great for America. Now, don't get me wrong. Not all lobbying is shady backroom deals. Sometimes it's environmental groups pushing for cleaner air laws, or veterans organizations advocating for better healthcare. But let's be real. The ones with the deepest pockets tend to shout the loudest. And here's the kicker. In 2023, companies spent a whopping $1.45 billion on lobbying. That's billion with a B, folks. Makes you wonder who's really calling the shots in Washington, doesn't it? Now that we understand what a lobbyist does, we can move on. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Meta, formerly known as Facebook. While they've been quiet about the TikTok ban publicly, their fingerprints are all over this mess. Remember back in 2022 when the Washington Post revealed that Meta had paid a GOP consulting firm to run a smear campaign against TikTok. They were placing op-eds in major news outlets, enlisting political reporters and local politicians to help spread disinformation about TikTok. Talk about playing dirty. And while Meta claims they haven't lobbied directly on the TikTok ban, their lobbying expenditures tell a different story. In the first quarter of 2024, when the TikTok ban was being hotly debated, Meta's lobbying reached a whopping $4.79 million. Here's where things get really interesting. President-elect Donald Trump, who initially supported banning TikTok back in 2020, has suddenly had a change of heart. He's now asking the Supreme Court to pause the ban until after his inauguration. Why the sudden flip-flop? Well, it turns out Trump had a little chat with a Republican mega-donor who just happens to have a stake in ByteDance. Funny how these things work out, isn't it? So, what does all this mean for us, the American people? Well, if TikTok gets banned, guess who stands to benefit the most? That's right, Meta and Google. E-marketer projects that if TikTok is banned. More than half of the ad dollars spent on the platform in the US would go to Meta and Google-owned properties. Instagram and Facebook would take 22.7% and 17.1% of TikTok's reallocated ad spend, respectively. Google's YouTube would take roughly 10.7%. It's like watching sharks circle a wounded seal, except the seal is worth billions and the sharks wear suits. Folks, what we're seeing here is a masterclass in how Washington really works. It's not about national security or protecting our data. It's about money, power, and control. Our lawmakers are using their positions to enrich themselves and their corporate buddies, all while claiming it's for our own good. They're playing us for fools, thinking we won't notice or care. But here's the thing. We do notice, and we do care. And it's high time we start holding these people accountable. Because if we don't, they'll just keep getting away with it. So the next time you hear a politician ranting about TikTok and national security, just remember, follow the money. Because in this town, it's always about the Benjamins, baby. And that, my friends, is the real TikTok scandal. It's not about China or data security. It's about good old-fashioned American greed, wrapped up in a stars and stripes bow. So let's talk about this Hail Mary that Trump did to keep TikTok alive for now. You remember, he too wanted it banned. So why the change of heart? Could it be all the young voters, and he sees the potential to help with elections in the future? We can only speculate for now. But for the man who once led the charge to ban TikTok, he has now become its unlikely savior. On Sunday, he announced his intention to issue an executive order that would temporarily suspend the federal prohibition on TikTok, allowing the app to regain limited access in the US. This move came just hours before the ban was set to take effect. Following the Supreme Court's decision to uphold the law mandating ByteDance, TikTok's parent company, to sell its US operations or face a nationwide ban. Let's take a look at Trump's executive order, while providing immediate relief, faces several hurdles. The legal authority. There's uncertainty regarding Trump's legal authority to independently choose not to enforce a law that received overwhelming bipartisan support and was upheld by the Supreme Court. Legal experts question whether his order can sufficiently protect companies from penalties for noncompliance. Congressional opposition. Key figures like House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senator Tom Cotton have expressed skepticism about Trump's strategy. They argue that the law should be upheld, and any extension or deal must involve a genuine divestiture of TikTok's ownership. National security concerns. Despite Trump's assurances, national security remains a significant concern. Critics argue that any deal must ensure that TikTok's data is secure from Chinese government access, a challenge given the complexities of its global operations. Okay, what would be some potential benefits for keeping TikTok alive? Political capital. By saving TikTok, Trump gains favor with its vast user base, particularly young Americans who could be pivotal in future elections. His campaign has already leveraged TikTok to engage younger voters, and this move could solidify his appeal. Economic impact. Keeping TikTok operational in the US preserves jobs and economic activity associated with the platform, which could be portrayed as a win for American businesses and content creators. Negotiation leverage. Trump's executive order positions him as a negotiator, potentially allowing him to broker a deal that could benefit US companies or investors, aligning with his business-first approach. Now, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of what an IPO for TikTok would look like. We're talking about a potential goldmine here, folks, but it's not without its hurdles. TikTok's estimated worth is somewhere between $50 and $100 billion. That's a lot of zeros, making it a juicy target for Wall Street. But remember, this valuation assumes they keep that secret sauce, the algorithm. Without it, things get a bit trickier. If TikTok becomes an American company, it's a safe bet they'd list on the NYSE or NASDAQ. Here's how it would go down. They'd need to carve out the US operations from ByteDance, maybe through a new entity like TikTok Global. It's like separating the good parts of a pie from the crust. The SEC would have to give the green light, ensuring TikTok plays by US securities rules. No funny business allowed. Investment banks would step in, setting the share price and managing the whole shebang. They're like the wedding planners of the IPO world. TikTok's management would hit the road, pitching the company to potential investors. Think of it as a high-stakes beauty pageant for Wall Street. Finally, shares go public and the price is set by market demand. It's like opening the floodgates and watching the money pour in. Now, some of the challenges it would face. Without that algorithm, TikTok's value proposition changes. With all the political scrutiny, any deal involving TikTok would be under a microscope. Investors might get cold feet, fearing regulatory backlash. And as we know, the tech sector's like a roller coaster. One day you're up, the next you're down. An IPO in this environment could be a wild ride. Investors would be watching TikTok's user engagement and revenue like hawks. They need to see growth to justify that high valuation. Now, this executive order doesn't save the app. As long as it is framed as a national security measure, it only delays the ban. And if Trump finds a way to keep the app as it is, or bring it in as an American-owned company, this could definitely become deeply intertwined with financial interests. The potential for an American-owned TikTok to be listed on U.S. stock exchanges opens the door for the investments by members of Congress in competing tech stocks. While the selective enforcement against TikTok only, while other Chinese apps thrive, all point towards a narrative where economic gain plays a significant role. This situation exemplifies just how national security concerns can, and have been, leveraged to advance economic interests, creating a complex interplay between politics, finance, and technology. But what if? The real story behind the TikTok ban might not be about protecting American data or preventing foreign influence, but rather about securing that piece of pie for American investors and tech giants. As we close, I'd say, follow the money, folks. It's not just about security. It's about who gets to profit from this digital gold rush. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe, and tell me what you think. Is this all a smokescreen, or is there really a threat? We have been told that all these countries are a threat since the 50s when the Cold War was at its peak. Is it real, or is it all about control?